Okay, today we're in the home of Bill Miller. Bill is a longtime resident here, and he's probably served as a car salesman longer than anybody on record in Loudon history. And we'll talk a little bit about that later.
75.
How many?
75.
75 years.
This is 76 this year.
Wow. So he started selling cars when in the early 50s.
I went to old Loudon Motor Company.
Yeah.
In 52, December the 3rd.
Yeah. And still selling cars today at
That's
Jackie
right.
Jones Chevrolet in Sweetwater.
Jackie Jones Ford.
Jackie Jones
Sweetwater.
Ford.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. First of all, we'd like to have you talk about which community did you grow up in?
Church Street.
Church Street.
Yeah. 502.
I
Born
still
there.
remember. Tell me about your parents and your family growing up.
My daddy, he worked at Greer Hardware for many years. That was way back in the late 30s, 40s. He worked in the chair factory some, and he worked in the bacon hosiery mill some. Of course, back then, you either worked at bacon hosiery mill, the chair factory, or the mantle factory. That was the only three plants that we had.
Or farmed.
In Loudon, yeah.
So where did you go to elementary school?
Went to old elementary on Cedar Street.
Okay. What were your memories of elementary school there?
Oh, Mr. Albert Dukes, he was principal.
Uh-huh.
He could bust your tail, and in 5 minutes he'd meet you in the hall and put his arm around you, say, "How you doing today?" He never held it against you.
Yeah.
He was a fine, fine gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
He was. Albert Dukes, I'll never forget him. Remember Mr. Elmer Raper? Mr. Elmer was basketball coach. And Mr. Dukes also was principal and taught history.
Okay.
And when you got in the 8th grade, the first day of school, he told the class, "You will memorize all the states and their capitals, or you don't graduate when graduation day comes." Now, you could do it any time during the school year that you wanted, that you got it ready.
So you had grades 1 through 8.
1 through 8 at the old high school, at the old grammar school.
How many classes per grade? For example, did y'all have 1 or 2 8th grades?
No, just had one 8th grade
Just one
class,
8th grade,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it was just small then, back
Okay.
then, yeah.
Any childhood memories? Any childhood friends from?
Oh yeah,
that continue to be friends.
Yeah, I had Tommy Gallion, I had James Waller, G.W. Lambert, Gene Lambert, who used to be mayor. Had, we was all close friends.
Okay,
yeah,
good
sure
deal.
was.
So then you went on to high school.
Went on to high school.
At
Yeah,
Loudon High School, graduated in.
that's 50-51.
Okay.
Shorty McCall was principal. Tell you a short story about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I got to laying out of school. My daddy was in the barber shop to get a haircut late one evening, and Shorty come in and sat down and said, "Fred," said, "we need to do something about Bill laying out." Daddy said, "Shorty," he said, "I've got a job I go to every morning." Said, "You got a job you go to every morning." Said, "That's your job, keep him in school." Well, make a long story short, Shorty took care of the matter. Shorty bought him a car. He never had a car. And he bought him a small car, just a little car. I don't remember, it was a Crosby, it seemed like it was. Anyway, the street that ran up on the, we call next facing the football field, just had one step up into the hallway. Well, everybody went to the cafeteria to eat lunch. Well, when Shorty came back, there was his car sitting in front of the office door. Well, back then, the football players was pretty good sized boys. He got on the microphone, said, "All football players come to the office." They came to the office. I was standing in the hall. He said, "Boys, I don't know who put that car in this hallway, but said, get it out." Nobody never said a word. They went out and pushed it back to the door and picked it up and set it back outside. I remember that well.
That's one time you were telling me a story about Jim Blair, playing football at Loudon.
Yeah, Jim told me the story
the
about that.
tobacco story.
Yep.
Would you tell that story?
Well, Jim told me, said he was playing right tackle. Said this other boy was playing left tackle. Said they got in a huddle. And said this boy said, boys, I can't take no more on that left tackle. Said that boy on that other team's killing me. Jim says, let's swap. So they swapped ends. Jim said, I got over there. He said, I looked that old boy right between the eyes. Said, when they centered that ball, Jim said, I just squirted his eyes full of backer juice. He said, you know, said every time we lined up, said that old boy'd back up on that line. Said he didn't want no more of me.
He played before you, though, right?
Oh, long. Yeah.
I was trying to think
Yeah.
if he was on one of those
Way back
late
when
30s.
when they hauled cinders from the chair factory and made the football field. They played on cinders.
Okay.
I remember the cinders. I was a kid, but I remember those cinders. Yeah, they played on cinders. Jim said we skinned all over. Said we didn't have all this extra padding they've got now. And suits.
Was that at the Bacon Field?
Yeah, up on top of the hill. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was John R. Newman. He was telling me that the first football field was actually down there near Ferry Street.
Yeah, that used to be the old ball field. First Street did.
Yeah.
Baseball and all. Yeah, everything was played on First Street.
And the players would walk from the old gym.
Yeah.
On down.
Yeah, that's where that's where everything was played, right there on First Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in 1952, at the age of 16, you bought your first car.
Bought my first car, give $105 for it, Curtis and Tipton. It's an A-model Roadster, and it's in Knoxville today.
Is that right?
Yeah, I've tried everywhere in the world to buy it back.
Yeah.
The people's got it. Their family had it, and they want to keep it, and I can understand that.
Yeah. So how did you earn the money to buy the car?
I mowed yards back then, 50 cents and a quarter for a yard. Man, if you got $1, you was a rolling back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saved my money. And it was $100 plus $5 sales tax, and that was every dime I had too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was it.
A Roadster.
Yeah, he drove the road. Top would lay down on it. Had a rumble seat. We used to lay that top down, get it full of youngins.
Yeah.
Ride around, play freeze out in it in the wintertime. It didn't have no heater back then.
Yeah.
No, an A model.
Well, you began selling and working at Loudon Motor Company.
Loudon Motor Company, yeah.
So, tell me about your memories early memories of working.
Mr. H. Giffen owned half of it. Mr. Peg Bell owned the other half. Mr. Giffen was a justice of the peace, and he tried cases right there in the garage. And Mr. Bell, Peg Bell, he was state senator down in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
He was just in and out.
And the first football coach at Loudon.
Yeah, Peg was. He sure was. Yeah.
Tell the story about when Peg would be running for re-election and he'd get
he'd come to the garage. He'd say, Bill, let's go down the street. We'd go down the street. You'd see a man across the street, and he'd say, Bill, who's that? Well, that's old so-and-so. He'd go over there, put his arm around him, shake hands with him, and said, Joe, I ain't seen you in a minute a day. He didn't know Joe from Adam. I'm running for senator. Well, now, Peg, I'll vote for you. Well, we'd go on a little farther, said, who's that older lady? Well, that's Mary so-and-so. Mm-hmm. Mary! She said, Peg Bell. He said, how in the world are you? He didn't know them people. He'd been gone too long.
Now, when he retired, did he come back to Loudon?
No, he stayed in Knoxville. He left when he quit running for Senate. He was U.S. Marshal out of Knoxville.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he stayed in Knoxville.
He lived in Knoxville. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And tell me about them unloading cars up at the depot.
Well, if you'll go by the old depot, that ramp is still up there.
Okay.
I went by there one day last week, and that old ramp, the box cars come in right by the side of it, and the T models come apart in pieces, and the frame, and they had to lift them out and put the wheels on. Had the motor in them, of course. Then they had to put the body and all. Yeah.
Was Mr. Giffen telling you about that?
Mr. Giffen said that was all started in 1924, old Loudon Motor Company. Mr. Giffen said he was help unloading and let one of them slip and broke his ankle one time up there. He told me about that. Sure did.
And then with Mr. Giffen, you said that he would try cases in...
Yeah, right there in the little office, little bitty office. Yeah, in the garage.
Do you remember any, like when people would come up there and get married as well?
Oh yeah, we married a lot of people, me and him. He'd marry him. He'd say, "Here, Bill, sign this as a witness." Yeah. He sat behind that old pot-bellied stove.
Yeah.
And looked down towards the courthouse, and he'd see a couple coming with a white envelope in their hand. Well, he said, "There comes my dinner." They'd come in. I'd say, "Can I help you?" He said, "I'm looking for H.H. Giffen." He looked at old stove, said, "I'm H.H. What can I do for you?" He said, "We want to get married." He said, "Come right on over here." He had a little old piece of paper about that big. He'd get it out and read it off. And they'd say, "How much we owe you?" He said, $2.
That's good.
Oh.
And you were telling me that you had a list of places in Loudon that you were going to talk about.
Yeah. We one of them was that old Masonic Lodge Hall down there that Dr. E. Wood told me about.
Yeah.
That's one I had down. Now, behind the old post office, Mr. Lomax, that was Ted Lomax's granddaddy, he had a little produce house there.
Really?
Yep. Just as you went in behind it, sat right in the corner there on the right. He'd buy chickens, ducks, you know, and as time went on, he moved on up behind Loudon Motor Company, going toward the high school. That building's been tore down now. Okay. There was a building there, and he moved his produce place in there. I remember that very well, okay. Mr. Lomax. Sure did. And where TikTok ice cream is, at one time the Wilson girls had a soda fountain all there in that building. Sure did.
That was
I worked for them.
Really?
Yeah, I was a kid.
That was boy. Tim and Bud's
that was
grandfather.
That was
and grandmother.
It was Nina and Lillian and Claire Elizabeth. They was three girls. Okay. That's Bob Wilson's daughters.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure was. One of them was Tim's mother.
Right.
And the other two was his aunt. Yeah. Sure
what about
was.
that?
I remember that well.
I didn't know that.
Yep, sure did. I worked for Doc Riggs when I was in high school. He had a drugstore to the right of the red light where the title office is. I worked for Doc Riggs there. He had a drugstore back in the 49, 50, long in there. Sure did. Did right where the old pilot used to be, Miss Fanny Harrison lived there. She had a room in the house there.
Really?
Yeah, sure did. I remember her well. I knew Miss Fanny. Yeah, remember her well. And then down where the hotel is now, Jackie Payne had owned that, and behind it he had a woodworking shop. It had that hotel there then, but he had that. Yeah, and then the old hospital was where Dr. Lambert's office is, dentist office is.
Right.
That's the old hospital. Dr. Joe Harrison had that. Now, I don't remember Dr. Joe, but I remember Dr. Saunders that had that after Dr. Joe. I remember Dr. Saunders.
When did they tear that building down?
It had to be in the 50s.
Okay.
Yeah. They made apartments out of it, and then they tore it down, of course. But I remember that, and I remember the old toll house was down at the bridge.
Yeah.
Cost you a quarter and a nickel for each person. Quarter for car and driver, nickel for each person. Or you could drive down to the ferry and have a whole car load and go across on it for just a quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember all that.
They did away with that in 47, I think.
Remember Mr. Ferguson that worked there. Remember Mr. Watson that worked there. Remember Ed Summit from Lenore City that worked there.
Really?
Yeah. Now, if you wanted to go to Knoxville, You go down there, and somebody would pull up and say, "Are you going to Knoxville?" "Yeah." "Well, I got a good friend right here." Said, "Would you let him ride?" "Yeah, be glad to." And you could ride to Knoxville, little old city. Yeah, people let you ride back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they knew the men that worked there knew everybody around.
Right.
Yeah, and they sold papers there. Had on the right of the bridge, just a little bitty building. This older man run it, and he had kids that would sell papers for a nickel, and they got a penny a paper. Well, Oak Ridge was blowing and going then, and Will Hite was running buses out of Etowah, Inglewood, Athens, Sweetwater to Oak Ridge. Well, they'd get on the bus when they stopped, sell papers. They'd get about halfway across the bridge. Bus drivers stopped, let them off. They'd come running back, get another load of papers.
What about that?
I
That's
remember
great.
that. Yeah, sure do. Remember that well. Sure do. You ain't gonna believe what I'm gonna tell you about the car dealers in Loudon.
Okay.
Right out, you know where Cinco's is?
Mm-hmm.
Right across the street, that's building there.
Mm-hmm.
They Kaiser and Frazier. Wilkerson boys owned that in Lenore City. Come on down here to the red light, West End red light. On the right, A.T. Miller had Studebaker. You come on downtown, was Loudon Motor Company, had Ford. You went up the street to Miller Motor Company, they had Chevrolet and Buick. Well, as time went on, Jack Randolph opened Chrysler, Plymouth, and Rambler across the river. On the left where the lawnmower place is now. And I bought half of that.
Yeah.
We was partners in that. But we had, and down where Pete Stimson's office was, excuse me, that was a whippet dealer. I think I've heard my daddy talk about Mr. Grubb owned that.
And then originally, I think Kimbrough probably.
Yeah, Kimbrough, I never did know those people.
Yeah, that was early on.
Yeah, I never did know them. And up behind Miller, well, if you go behind Miller Motor Company, between the Miller Motor Company Depot, on the right there, there's a parking lot now. Mr. Blackburn had a used car, little car parts there, like fuel pumps and generators and stuff. Mr. Blackburn had that. I remember him well. He had an Auburn. I'll never forget that. Boy, that was some automobile, convertible back in its day. That was a car.
So we had plenty of places you could buy a car then.
Oh yeah. You had about, I think, 10 different kinds of vehicles that you could buy in Loudon. Now, when you went behind that street, behind Miller Motor Company, goes out by the railroad, on the right was a dry cleaners out there. I remember that well. There's a dry cleaners out there. Sure was. And where Riverview Church is, that was a planing mill, lumber place right there. Mr. John Hooker run that.
Okay.
I knew that. I played over there in the sawdust a many a day.
No, planing mill. What is that?
They dress lumber.
Yeah.
They had a lot of sawdust. We'd go over there and ride, get us a plank, and ride off that out into the lake back there. Yeah, sure did. Yeah. Now, where the Durlight building is out here, that was a sawmill at one time, right there. Mr. I think A.T. Miller owned that. I believe I'm right. This is you cross the railroad right there on the left.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you another little story about that. My Uncle Joe Dick, my mama's brother, he was something else. He said they had a big carnival set up there one time. Said he's just a boy. They lived down the lower end of the county. And a bunch of the country boys come to the carnival. And he said a train pulled up and stopped. And he said, we got a rope off one of them big tents and tied it on that train. And I've heard him tell it many a time. He said when that train pulled out, he said them gypsies come out of them tents. He said they was leaving. He said that train drug that tent down there. Of course, nobody knew who done it, nothing about it.
And
But I've heard him talk about that. Sure have. Yeah. And another thing he done, the old Loudon Pharmacy, Henry and Ernie owned it. He had an old horse named Pepper. The old horse he was rowdy. I mean, Joe was the only one could do anything with him. He rode him through the drugstore. He got drunk, come to town, got drunk, rode him in the front door, and went out the back, that side door, right down by the soda fountain. Yeah.
It was a story for the reunions, wasn't it?
Yeah, he sure did. He done that. Yeah. I remember when the river froze over.
Do you?
Yeah. Now, I did not see the A model go across there, but Jimmy Burnett told me all about that.
Yeah, it was Jake Littleton that went across.
Skeet was driving it, Skeet Miller. Jimmy said, I was standing on the running board.
Is that right?
And he said, Bill, if we'd ever stopped, said he'd just sunk. He said, you could see the ice roll in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
He said, it'd just roll right in front of it. He said, if we'd ever stopped, said she'd have went down. Now, I believe that he told me that J.E. Greenway was on the A model too. There was two in the front seat and one on each running board.
Okay.
I believe he said J.E. was involved in that.
Okay.
I believe I'm right.
There's probably more than one story on who actually drove across.
Yeah. But they said Skeet was the one that was driving it.
Skeet.
Skeet Miller. His daddy owned Miller Motor Company. Yeah, I've seen quite a bit to come through Loudon and go and come and go. I remember the old train wreck that happened down right along where the Presbyterian Church is. I remember that.
Tell me about that. What do you remember about it?
It was loaded with lettuce. Had a big load of lettuce. And there was lettuce everywhere, I'm telling you, scattered and cases of it.
Did it just run off the track or something?
Yeah, something happened that flipped it, and it run off and just come off that bank car in front of the in front of the Presbyterian Church.
About how old were you at that time of close? Ballpark figure.
I believe that might have been in the early 50s.
Okay.
Might have been, but I remember it. I sure do.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't hurt nobody.
Right.
But I remember it. But that was something, boy. People wanted to see the train wreck.
I bet.
Yep. Yep. But did I ever tell you the story about the boy that wanted a job with the railroad?
No.
This fellow wanted a job with the railroad, and he went and they interviewed him, and they called him back and gave him a test. Well, in about 2 weeks, they called him back. Said, you passed the test. Said, we're going to take this battery a test. Well, he did. Well, a couple of weeks, they called him back and said, we want to hire you. Said, you passed both tests. Said, you see that big tower up there? Said, yeah. Said, you're going to go up in that tower. Said, you're going to switch these trains coming in from the north and south. Put them on the right track. He said, okay. They said, now we're going to ask you one question before you go to work. Said, if you had a train coming out of the south at 50 miles an hour and one coming out of the north at 50, said, on the same track, said, what would you do? He said, I'd call my brother Leroy. Said, what would you call Leroy for? Said, man, he ain't never seen a train wreck like that. Hey. Yeah, I've seen a lot of changes in Loudon. I remember when the streets were gravel.
Is that right?
Yes, sir. Oh, listen, when they blacktopped Church Street, man, I thought I'd done died and gone on. We had a place to ride our bicycles that was smooth.
So that was in the 50s?
Yeah, that was way back there. Yeah, sure was.
Well, in 1956, you took a second job over at Viscay's.
Yeah.
Tell me about
I went there the 10th day of December of '56. I was the 8th hourly employee hired.
Wow.
Yeah. Construction was still building it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't work for construction. I worked with construction.
Mm-hmm.
That big green warehouse that's down there, out from it now. Mm-hmm. I worked out there. Everything came in that warehouse, and then you issued it back out to the construction people. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you did that for
Well,
30-something years and all?
I stayed with them 37 and a half years. Yeah, sure did. Yeah, I had that heart attack and I never did go back.
Okay.
I stayed gone.
What year was that?
Darrell, you'll have to figure it up. It's 29 years ago,
Okay.
the 3rd of
Well, it
last
started in
month.
56. It would be 93, 94.
Somewhere along in there.
Yeah. All right. Do you have good memories of this case?
Oh yeah.
Your job?
Yeah, I had some good memories over there. I had met a lot of nice construction people that was there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, I knew 99% of the employees as they
Yeah.
come in. I knew them. Yeah. We started our first machine in March over there. Yeah.
And so you kind of operated the store over there.
I
didn't you?
did. I did. Yeah. Had many hundreds of items.
Yeah.
Many. Yeah.
Well, and as you are working there, you're still working at the Loudon Motor Company, correct?
I did. I worked.
So you have a lot of experience selling cars. And I'm going to ask you, what makes a good car salesman?
Knowing how to treat people. And I tell these young boys, don't look at a man's clothes when he come in. You don't know how much money he's carrying. I said, show him what he wants to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Let him drive it. Treat him nice. He may not buy it today, but tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I said, let me tell you all another story, boys. I said, these young kids that come in, boys and girls, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, they want to look at these GT Mustangs, which is a pretty stout car.
Mm-hmm.
I said, open it up. You can't let them drive it, but crank it up, let them look at it. Well, they can't buy. No. But tomorrow, Grandpa may bring them in and say, where's that car this kid wanted to see?
Mm-hmm.
That right there. They look at it and say, well, what's it take to buy it? I said, he may count it out to you and he may write you a check.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I've seen it happen. I said, if you'll treat people right and deal with them right, they'll tell their neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
If you treat them ugly, they'll tell everybody.
Yeah.
That's always been my theory.
Mm-hmm.
Don't never judge a book by its cover.
So you still enjoy selling cars?
I do. I enjoy the people.
Okay.
I enjoy the people.
Now, you married one of the most loved teachers in Loudon County
Well, thank
high
you.
school history.
Thank you.
She really was. In fact, she was my favorite teacher. Tell me about Miss Mildred Miller.
Well, Mildred came here in '56. In the middle of the year, that teacher had left, and she graduated on Saturday. Shorty McCall went to Knoxville and met a professor and asked him if he had anybody graduating that day that was qualified. And he said, I got one. He said, I want to see her. Well, he sent for her. The professor did when the graduation was over, to her to come to his office. She did. He introduced her to Shorty McCall. And Shorty talked to her and said, will you help me the rest of the year?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, yeah, I will. So she said, I'll take my mother home. Then her family came from West Tennessee, Martin.
Okay.
Martin was a 12-hour drive. They no interstate,
Right.
Highway 70. And so she said, I'll take my mother home tomorrow on Sunday. I'll come back on Monday. I'll go teaching on Tuesday. He said, I'll have you a place to stay. So she got back in town Monday, late, and she called him, and he met her downtown and took her out to Miss Lucille Purdy's on Ferry Street. She had John Harrison's mother was staying there. She was they hadn't got married then.
Okay.
And so she took, and there's two more girls sitting there. I can't remember them.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, she had Mildred, he had her room out there. Well, then we met, and we got to going together, and at the end of school, Shorty said, Mildred, said, do you want to sign a contract for another year, or are you going to leave me? Well, she said, it looks like me and Bill's gonna get married, said, I guess on this day. So, we was married 65 years in December of last year, and then Mildred passed away, no, not last year, 21.
Okay.
Then Mildred passed away in January.
Okay.
Yeah,
Of 22?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We,
So just a little over a year?
I used to tell on Mildred that in that 65 years, I never went to bed a single night mad, but I sure did set up a lot of nights. She'd say, Bill, I'd be ashamed. But Darrell, I'm gonna brag. She taught school 41 years. She never, in that 41 years, came home and said anything about anybody's child.
Wow.
If she had a problem, it stayed at school. She didn't bring it home. She never talked
What
about
about
nobody's children. Nobody's. Never did. Never did.
That is something special there.
She never complained about school. Never complained about the staff or anything. She enjoyed it.
Yeah.
She enjoyed teaching.
Well, in looking back across your lifetime, who was the greatest influence on your life?
Mr. Albert Dukes.
Is that right?
Yes, sir, Mr. Albert Dukes.
And why is that?
He was a gentleman. Of course, I was raised in the First Baptist Church.
Okay.
From a little boy right on up, and Mr. Albert was a deacon.
Okay.
In the church, but after he got disabled, I'd go by and see him. He'd say, Bill, sit down and tell me what all's going on down at the church. How's the church doing, and so forth. And when we always had a Sunday dinner at the church, I always fixed him a plate and took it to him.
Is that right?
Yes, sir.
That's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
Mr. Albert was a fine man. I thought the world of him.
Yeah.
Sure did.
Well, everybody leaves a legacy. Well, what do you want your legacy to be?
Lord, I don't know.
You hadn't thought about that?
No.
Well, what are you most proud of?
Well, I've always tried to be an honest man. I've always tried to be right up front. If I had a car back when I was young and you wanted to buy it, and you said, Bill, has it ever been wrecked? Yeah, it has. I'll be honest with you, tell you. I always try to tell it like it is.
Yeah, right.